The courtroom camera captured a moment so absurd, so perfectly orchestrated for disaster, that it would become the most replayed clip in Judge Judy's 25-year television history. Karen Henderson strutted through those double doors like she was walking into her own coronation, her designer handbag swinging with each confident step, her perfectly highlighted hair bouncing with the kind of energy that screamed entitlement. But it wasn't Karen alone that made this entrance legendary. Behind her, struggling to keep pace while clutching an oversized briefcase that looked like it came from a discount store, was the man she introduced to everyone as my attorney, Michael Bradford. The way she said those words with such smug satisfaction, such absolute certainty that she had outsmarted the system, would haunt her for the rest of her life. What Karen Henderson didn't know as she settled into the defendant's chair with that infuriating smirk was that Judge Judy had spent the previous evening making phone calls that would expose the biggest courtroom fraud in television history. She didn't know that the single question Judge Judy was preparing to ask would destroy not just her case, but her entire world. She had no idea that in less than 15 minutes, she would be sobbing uncontrollably while her lawyer was being escorted out in handcuffs, facing multiple felony charges that would send him to prison for years. This wasn't just another case about a property dispute. This was about to become a masterclass in what happens when arrogance meets accountability, when fraud meets justice, and when someone foolish enough to bring a fake lawyer into Judge Judy's courtroom learns why that's the worst decision anyone could ever make. Before we dive into the complete destruction of Karen and her fake lawyer, you need to hit that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to witness will restore your faith in the justice system. This is the moment when two con artists thought they could outsmart America's toughest judge and instead walked straight into a trap that had been carefully set from the very first second they entered her courtroom. Trust me, the devastation that's coming will leave you speechless. You won't want to miss a single second of this takedown. Karen Henderson had been terrorizing her neighborhood in suburban Phoenix for 3 years. At 42 years old, she had perfected the art of using the legal system as a weapon against anyone who dared to cross her. Her latest victim was Maria Chen, a 68-year-old retired teacher who lived next door and had made the fatal mistake of politely asking Karen to stop parking her car across Maria's driveway. That simple, reasonable request triggered a campaign of harassment that would make anyone's blood boil. Karen responded by building a fence not on her own property line, but 3 feet into Maria's yard, deliberately blocking access to the garden where Maria grew vegetables to supplement her fixed income. When Maria protested, Karen smiled sweetly and said she'd see her in court, confident that her secret weapon would guarantee victory. That secret weapon was Michael Bradford, a man she found through a Facebook advertisement promising professional legal representation at a fraction of traditional lawyer costs. The ad was clever, deliberately vague, using phrases like legal expertise and courtroom experience, without ever technically claiming he was a licensed attorney. But Karen, blinded by her desire to win at any cost, saw what she wanted to see. She paid Michael Bradford $3,500 up front, a sum Maria could never afford, which was exactly what Karen was counting on. Bradford promised her guaranteed victory, claimed he had 15 years of courtroom experience, and assured her he knew exactly how to handle judges like Judy Shandlin. He spent 2 weeks coaching Karen on what to say, feeding her pseudo-legal terminology that sounded impressive to someone with no real legal knowledge, and building her confidence to dangerous levels. He told her Judge Judy was just a TV personality, not a real judge anymore, and that her bark was worse than her bite. He promised Karen that together they would not only win the case, but humiliate Maria Chen so badly that she'd probably move away, solving Karen's neighbor problem permanently. What neither of them knew was that Judge Judy Shandlin had been a family court judge in New York for 25 years before her television career, had presided over more than 20,000 cases, and had developed an almost supernatural ability to spot liars, frauds, and con artists within 30 seconds of meeting them. The moment Judge Judy's researchers received the case file and saw that Karen was being represented by someone named Michael Bradford from Bradford Legal Services, red flags went up immediately. A quick search of the State Bar website showed no attorney by that name licensed in Arizona. An expanded search of all 50 states came up empty. Judge Judy's team dug deeper, discovering that Michael Bradford ran a business that carefully skirted the line between legal consulting and practicing law without a License. They found his website, filled with testimonials from supposed clients praising his legal knowledge, courtroom skills, and ability to win cases that other lawyers wouldn't take. But nowhere on that website, buried in disclaimers written in tiny font at the bottom of pages most people never read, did it explicitly state that Michael Bradford was a licensed attorney. It said he provided legal services, legal representation, and courtroom advocacy. But the word attorney appeared only once, in the phrase "not a substitute for hiring an attorney," hidden where desperate people looking for cheap legal help would never bother to look. Judge Judy had seen this scam before, but never so brazenly brought into her own courtroom. She made phone calls to the Arizona State Bar, the district attorney's office, and 3 other people who had hired Bradford and later discovered he wasn't actually a lawyer. One of those people had lost their house because Bradford's incompetent advice caused them to miss critical filing deadlines. Another had been sanctioned by a judge for submitting documents Bradford had prepared, documents so poorly, written and legally nonsensical that the judge suspected fraud. By the time Karen Henderson and Michael Bradford walked into her courtroom that morning, Judge Judy knew everything. She knew he was a fraud. She knew Karen had paid him $3,500. She knew he had been running the scam for at least 3 years, and she had already decided that this case would end with both of them facing consequences they never saw coming. That morning, Karen posted on Facebook about her upcoming appearance on Judge Judy, bragging that she had hired a real lawyer who would expose the show as rigged entertainment. She included a selfie of herself and Bradford outside the studio, both smiling confidently, Karen flashing a peace sign as if she were heading to a party instead of a courtroom. The comments were full of encouragement, friends telling her to destroy Judge Judy, to show them who's boss, and predicting her viral fame once the episode aired. Karen replied to every comment, her confidence growing higher and higher, never once stopping to wonder why a lawyer charging a fraction of normal rates hadn't asked for a retainer agreement, why he'd never sent her official law firm documents, or why his business card listed a Gmail address instead of a professional domain. She wanted to believe she'd found a loophole, a way to get professional representation without paying professional prices, and that desire blinded her to every warning sign that something was very wrong. Michael Bradford spent the morning before taping, coaching Karen one last time in the studio parking lot. He reminded her to let him do most of the talking, to nod seriously when he cited fake legal precedents, and to maintain an expression of righteous confidence no matter what Judge Judy said. He assured her that television judges were limited in what they could actually do, that it was all for entertainment, and that as long as they stuck to the script he prepared, they'd walk away with a victory and the $5,000 maximum judgment Karen was seeking from Maria Chen. What Bradford didn't tell Karen was that he'd failed out of law school after 1 semester, had never taken the bar exam, and that every case he'd handled over the past 3 years had either been settled out of court by desperate clients or resulted in default judgments because his filings were so incompetent that judges simply ignored them. He had counted on most people being too embarrassed, too broke, or too unaware of the law to realize he had no idea what he was doing. He'd gotten away with it dozens of times before, and his arrogance had grown with every successful con. Walking into Judge Judy's courtroom was the single biggest mistake of his criminal career. The case was scheduled as a standard 15-minute segment, but producers had been quietly told to keep the cameras rolling no matter what happened. Judge Judy had informed them that this case might run longer than usual, and that what was about to unfold needed to be captured in full. The audience, a mix of retirees and daytime TV fans who had waited months for tickets, had no idea they were about to witness television history. The episode they were about to see would be viewed over 50 million times across social media within 48 hours of airing. Maria Chen sat in the plaintiff's chair, a small, dignified woman in a simple dress, clutching a folder of documents proving that Karen's fence was illegally built on her property. She looked nervous, intimidated by Karen's expensive clothes and supposed professional representation, convinced she was about to lose everything because she couldn't afford a real lawyer. Judge Judy entered the courtroom with her signature no-nonsense stride, her black robe flowing as she took her seat at the bench. The audience stood respectfully, then sat as she arranged her papers with the precision of someone who had done this thousands of times before. Her sharp eyes scanned the courtroom, taking in every detail like a predator assessing the field. She looked at Maria Chen with a brief nod, then turned her gaze to Karen Henderson and the man beside her at the defendant's table. Judge Judy's face remained neutral, but longtime viewers recognized the subtle narrowing of her eyes, the sign that she had already formed an opinion, and it wasn't a favorable one. The bailiff announced the case, his voice echoing through the packed courtroom. Case number 4287, Maria Chen versus Karen Henderson. The plaintiff is suing for $5,000 for the cost of removing an illegally constructed fence and damages to her property. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled in front of her face as she addressed the plaintiff. Ms. Chen, tell me in your own words why we're here today. Maria's voice trembled as she began. She explained that she had lived peacefully in her home for 15 years before Karen Henderson moved in next door 3 years earlier. The relationship had started politely enough but soured after she asked Karen to stop parking across her driveway. She described coming home one day to find construction workers building a fence that cut directly through her vegetable garden, destroying tomato plants and herb beds she had tended for years. When she confronted Karen, she was told the fence was on Karen's property and that if she disagreed, she should hire a surveyor. Maria did just that, spending $800 she could barely afford on a professional survey, which confirmed that the fence stood 3 feet inside her property line. When she showed the results to Karen, Karen laughed and told her to take it to court if you think you're right. Judge Judy listened closely, occasionally jotting notes, her expression growing colder with each detail of Karen's harassment. When Maria finished, her voice breaking as she described having to give up the garden that had been her pride and joy, Judge Judy turned her attention to the defendant's table. Ms. Henderson, I see you've brought representation with you today. Mr. Bradford, is it? Her tone was calm, almost pleasant, but anyone familiar with Judge Judy's courtroom knew this was the calm before the storm. Michael Bradford stood up with practiced confidence, smoothing his cheap tie and clearing his throat. Yes, Your Honor. Michael Bradford of Bradford Legal Services representing Ms. Henderson in this matter. He spoke with the kind of affected authority that came from watching too many courtroom dramas. His voice was deeper than natural, his posture overly stiff and deliberate. Judge Judy's eyebrows lifted slightly. Bradford Legal Services. And where is your office located, Mr. Bradford? It seemed like small talk, a harmless question before the case began. Bradford's confident smile faltered for just an instant before he replied, I operate primarily out of the greater Phoenix metropolitan area, Your Honor, though I serve clients throughout Arizona. It was a vague answer that sounded specific but said nothing. Judge Judy made a quick note on her pad, then gestured for him to continue. And you're here today to defend your client against Ms. Chen's allegations regarding this fence? Bradford launched into his opening statement with the enthusiasm of someone convinced he was dazzling the room. He spoke about property rights, about the importance of homeowners being free to make improvements to their land without harassment. He used phrases like pursuant to applicable statutes and relevant case law establishes, yet cited no specific statutes or cases. He portrayed Karen Henderson as a respected community member who had acted in good faith based on her understanding of the property boundaries. He even claimed the survey Maria had obtained came from a disreputable company known for producing inaccurate results to stir up disputes. Every few sentences, he glanced at Karen, who nodded eagerly, her smug smile growing wider with each pseudo-legal phrase he delivered. Judge Judy listened in silence, jotting an occasional note but never interrupting. It was unusual enough that regular audience members began exchanging curious looks. Normally, she would have cut off such rambling within 30 seconds. But today she was letting Bradford dig his own grave, giving him enough rope to tie a noose that would tighten around both him and his client. When Bradford finally finished, clearly proud of his performance, Judge Judy leaned forward slightly. Mr. Bradford, that was quite a presentation, she said evenly. Tell me, in your 15 years of legal experience, how many cases have you personally tried? It seemed like a simple, reasonable question meant to establish his credentials. Bradford's fixed smile didn't waver, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of panic. Well, Your Honor, I've handled numerous cases across various jurisdictions, primarily focused on achieving favorable settlements for my clients rather than proceeding to trial. In my experience, a skilled legal professional can often negotiate outcomes that serve everyone's interest without the need for prolonged litigation. It was another non-answer. A string of impressive-sounding words that completely avoided the question. Judge Judy's slight smile made it clear she'd noticed. "That's very diplomatic of you, Mr. Bradford," she said evenly. "But I asked you a specific question. How many cases have you personally tried in court?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Bradford shifted his weight, clutching his briefcase tighter. "Your Honor, if we could perhaps focus on the merits of the current case rather than my professional background, I believe we could resolve this matter more efficiently. It was a mistake, and everyone in that courtroom knew it except for Bradford and Karen. You don't deflect Judge Judy's questions. You don't steer her courtroom, and you definitely don't imply her questions are irrelevant." Judge Judy's expression hardened in an instant, transforming from mild curiosity to cold precision. Her eyes locked onto Bradford with laser focus. When she spoke again, her voice had lost all trace of warmth. "Mr. Bradford, I didn't ask you what you thought was efficient. I asked you a direct question and I expect a direct answer. How many cases have you personally tried in a courtroom?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Bradford's face flushed, then began to pale. Beads of sweat formed along his hairline despite the cool air. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Your Honor, I believe my track record speaks for itself. My clients have consistently expressed satisfaction with the outcomes I've achieved on their behalf." Judge Judy's hand came down on her desk with a sharp crack that made half the audience jump. "That's 3 times you've avoided answering a simple question. Let me try another one. Where did you attend law school, Mr. Bradford?" Karen's smile was gone. She watched her so-called lawyer with growing dread. The sweat, the stammering, the way his hands trembled as he shuffled papers that suddenly seemed very important. This wasn't how she'd imagined things going. Bradford was supposed to be confident and commanding, not crumbling under pressure. "I attended a very prestigious institution, Your Honor," he said, his voice noticeably higher now, one with a strong focus on practical legal application rather than purely theoretical study. Judge Judy leaned back slightly, the faint, predatory smile playing at her lips, a familiar signal to longtime viewers that someone was about to be utterly dismantled. "A prestigious institution," she repeated. "How interesting. What year were you admitted to the bar, Mr. Bradford?" The question hung in the air like a blade about to drop. Bradford's complexion drained from red to white in seconds. "Your Honor, I'm not sure how my credentials are relevant to this case about a property dispute," he said weakly. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even those unfamiliar with legal proceedings knew a lawyer refusing to answer a question about bar admission was a massive red flag. Karen sat rigid, her earlier smugness replaced by pure panic as realization began to sink in. Something was terribly, catastrophically wrong. Judge Judy raised one hand, instantly silencing the whispers. "Let me help you out, Mr. Bradford." "Your credentials are relevant," Judge Judy said coolly, "because I spent yesterday evening making some very interesting phone calls. I contacted the Arizona State Bar Association. Would you like to know what they told me?" Bradford's mouth opened, but no words came out. His briefcase slipped from his sweaty hands and hit the floor with a heavy thud that echoed through the silent courtroom. "They told me," Judge Judy continued, her voice slicing through the tension, "that there is no attorney named Michael Bradford licensed to practice law in the state of Arizona." A murmur rippled through the room. "So I expanded my search," she went on. "I called the bar associations in California, Nevada, New Mexico, and Texas, thinking perhaps you were licensed in a neighboring state. Nothing. I had my research team search the national database of licensed attorneys. Your name appears exactly nowhere." Karen Henderson let out a strangled sound between a gasp and a sob. Her manicured hand flew to her mouth as realization struck like a collapsing building. She turned toward Bradford, eyes wide with panic. "Michael, tell her," she pleaded. "Tell her you're a lawyer. Show her your license," but Bradford didn't move. His face was ashen, his body rigid. A man watching his entire world collapse in real time. Judge Judy lifted a folder from her desk, the papers inside crisp and official. "I also spoke with the district attorney's office. They were very interested to learn that someone has been practicing law without a license in their jurisdiction. And I spoke with 3 of your former clients, or should I say, 3 of your victims, people who paid you thousands for legal representation, only to discover too late that you have no legal training whatsoever." The courtroom erupted in gasps and shocked exclamations. Audience members leaned forward, hands over their mouths. What had begun as a property dispute had turned into a live, televised exposure of criminal fraud. Judge Judy's voice cut through the uproar. So let me ask you one more time, Mr. Bradford, and I suggest you think very carefully before you answer. Are you or are you not a licensed attorney? The silence that followed was suffocating. Bradford stood motionless, his cheap suit now dark with sweat, his hands trembling. Finally, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, he said the words that sealed both his and Karen's fate. No, Your Honor. I'm not a licensed attorney. The courtroom exploded. Shouts, gasps, disbelief. The bailiff stepped forward, hand on his radio. Karen Henderson let out a wail that echoed through the studio. You told me you were a lawyer, she screamed, lunging at Bradford, her designer handbag swinging wildly. You said you had 15 years of experience. I paid you $3,500, you lying piece of trash. The bailiff grabbed her, pulling her back as she fought and screamed, her face twisted in rage and humiliation. Bradford just stood there, hollow-eyed and defeated, accepting the fury he knew he deserved. Judge Judy's gavel struck 3 sharp times, cracking through the chaos. Sit down, Miss Henderson. Right now. Karen collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably as the truth settled in. She had brought a fake lawyer into Judge Judy's courtroom. She had paid him $3,500 to commit fraud, and now live on national television, she was implicated in it. Millions would see this episode, and none of them would ever forget her name. Judge Judy's voice cut through the courtroom like a scalpel through flesh. Cold, precise, and utterly merciless, Mr. Bradford. You have been operating a criminal enterprise for at least 3 years, defrauding vulnerable people who came to you for legal help. You charged attorney fees, filed documents in court, and represented yourself as having legal expertise you do not possess. That's not just unauthorized practice of law. That's fraud, theft, and criminal impersonation. Without missing a beat, she turned to the bailiff. Officer, please detain Mr. Bradford. I'm holding him for the authorities, who, I believe, are waiting outside this courtroom right now. Right on cue, 2 uniformed officers entered through the side door. Their presence confirmed what everyone in the room now suspected. Judge Judy had orchestrated this takedown with the precision of a military operation. Bradford's legs buckled as the officers approached. They had to steady him as they locked the handcuffs around his wrists. The metallic clicks echoed through the silent courtroom like a funeral bell. Karen watched in horror as her lawyer, the man she'd trusted to win her case and crush her elderly neighbor, was led away in cuffs. His cheap suit was rumpled and sweat-stained, his head hanging low in shame. His abandoned briefcase lay on the floor like discarded evidence. But Judge Judy wasn't finished. Not even close. She turned her full attention to the sobbing woman at the defendant's table, her expression devoid of sympathy. Ms. Henderson, she said sharply, let's talk about your role in this fraud. Karen's head snapped up, mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks, her face a mask of desperation. I'm a victim here too, she cried. I didn't know he wasn't a real lawyer. He told me he was licensed. I paid him good money. Her voice rose to a frantic pitch, the voice of someone drowning and clawing for any excuse that might keep her from going under. Judge Judy's voice sliced through the courtroom like a scalpel. Cold, precise, and utterly merciless, Mr. Bradford. You have been operating a criminal enterprise for at least 3 years, defrauding vulnerable people who came to you for legal help. You charged attorney fees, filed documents in court, and represented yourself as having legal expertise you do not possess. That's not just unauthorized practice of law. That's fraud, theft, and criminal impersonation. Without missing a beat, she turned to the bailiff. Officer, please detain Mr. Bradford. I'm holding him for the authorities, who I believe are waiting outside this courtroom right now. 2 uniformed officers entered through the side door on cue, confirming that Judge Judy had orchestrated the entire takedown with military precision. Bradford's legs buckled as they approached, and the officers had to steady him while locking the handcuffs around his wrists. The metallic click of the cuffs echoed through the silent courtroom like a death knell. Karen watched in horror as her lawyer, the man she had trusted to win her case and humiliate her elderly neighbor, was led away in handcuffs. His cheap suit was rumpled and sweat-stained, his head hung low, and his briefcase lay abandoned on the courtroom floor like discarded evidence. But Judge Judy wasn't finished. Not even close. She turned her full attention to the sobbing woman at the defendant's table, her expression hard and unyielding. "Ms. Henderson," she said sharply, "let's talk about your role in this fraud." Karen's head snapped up, tears streaming down her face, mascara streaking her cheeks like melting wax. "I'm a victim here too," she cried. "I didn't know he wasn't a real lawyer. He told me he was licensed. I paid him good money." Her voice was high and frantic, the desperate sound of someone grasping for any excuse that might save her. Judge Judy's expression made it clear she wasn't buying a single word of it. "Did you verify his bar license? Did you check the state bar website? Did you ask to see any credentials whatsoever?" Karen's silence was answer enough. "Let me guess," Judge Judy continued. "He charged you less than a real attorney would. He promised results that sounded too good to be true. And you didn't ask questions because you liked what he was telling you. You wanted someone who would help you bully your elderly neighbor, someone who would support your illegal fence and your harassment campaign. You didn't care whether he was qualified as long as he gave you what you wanted." The precision of her words struck Karen like a blow. She tried to speak, but Judge Judy silenced her with a raised hand. "I looked into your background too, Ms. Henderson. This isn't your first frivolous lawsuit. You've sued 3 other neighbors in the past 2 years. You won by default because they couldn't afford lawyers and didn't show up. You've been using the legal system as a weapon to terrorize your community, and you thought bringing a fake lawyer into my courtroom would help you continue that pattern." Judge Judy lifted the property survey Maria Chen had submitted, a professional document from a reputable company with 4 decades of experience. "This survey proves your fence was built 3 feet onto Ms. Chen's property. You knew it was illegal when you built it. You did it deliberately to harass her after she asked you to stop blocking her driveway. And when she proved you were wrong, you paid a con man $3,500 to help you keep harassing her in my courtroom." Karen's sobs grew heavier. The confident, arrogant woman who had strutted into court believing she would humiliate her neighbor was now a shaking, tear-streaked mess, a national spectacle remembered as the woman foolish enough to bring a fake lawyer before Judge Judy. The ruling came fast and final. "Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $5,000, Judge Judy declared. That covers the removal of your illegal fence, repairs to Ms. Chen's property, and compensation for the harassment she endured. Additionally, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office to investigate your potential criminal liability for working with someone engaged in the unauthorized practice of law. If it's determined you knew or should have known Mr. Bradford wasn't licensed, you could face criminal charges as an accessory to fraud." The courtroom erupted in applause. Maria Chen, quiet until now, broke into tears of relief. After 3 years of harassment and damage, justice had finally prevailed, and in the most public, satisfying way possible. Judge Judy turned to the camera for her closing words. "Let this be a lesson to everyone watching. If you're going to hire a lawyer, verify their credentials. It takes 30 seconds to check the State Bar website. And if someone is charging you significantly less than market rates while promising guaranteed victories," Judge Judy continued, "that's a red flag the size of Texas. Use your common sense. And to those who think they can use the legal system to bully and harass others, remember this. Karma has perfect timing, and it always catches up with you." The gavel came down one final time, the sound echoing through the courtroom like a gunshot, sealing Karen Henderson's fate. Within hours of the episode airing, the clip exploded across social media. The moment Bradford admitted he wasn't a lawyer, Karen's screaming breakdown and Judge Judy's scathing takedown were shared over 50 million times. The hashtag #FakeLawyerKaren trended worldwide for 3 straight days. Law schools used the case as a teaching example about verifying credentials and the dangers of unauthorized legal practice. Major news outlets from CNN to Fox News covered the story, interviewing legal ethics professors about how Bradford had managed to operate for 3 years without detection. Michael Bradford was later charged with 15 counts of fraud, theft, and unauthorized practice of law. His trial revealed that he had defrauded over 20 clients of more than $65,000, causing some to lose homes, cases, and even custody battles due to his incompetence. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison and ordered to repay his victims in full. Karen Henderson faced her own reckoning. Though she avoided criminal charges, the $5,000 judgment, combined with the $3,500 she had paid Bradford, left her financially ruined. The greater blow, however, was social. Her face became a symbol of entitled foolishness. Neighbors who had once endured her harassment now openly celebrated her downfall. She was forced to remove the illegal fence at her own expense, while Maria Chen's garden was restored with the help of community volunteers inspired by her story. Karen eventually sold her home and moved to another state, but even there she couldn't escape her notoriety. People recognized her from the viral video. Her reputation clung to her like a shadow. The case entered courtroom television history, studied as a model of how investigative entertainment can expose real fraud and deliver genuine justice. Judge Judy's dismantling of Bradford's deception reminded viewers that the law isn't just about procedure. It's about accountability and protecting the vulnerable from exploitation. If you loved watching Judge Judy obliterate a fake lawyer and his arrogant client, the narrator concluded, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another epic takedown. Comment below, should people who impersonate lawyers face harsher penalties? And share this with anyone who needs a reminder that trying to outsmart the system never ends well, especially when you're foolish enough to try it in Judge Judy's courtroom. The next Karen takedown is coming soon, and it's going to be even more satisfying than this one.